in week 2 of this series that is called Good Surprises. We kicked it off last week as we started Easter. The resurrection of Jesus was a surprise to everybody involved. And so we're continuing that series, Good Surprises. And we have a verse that's going to kind of be our theme verse for the series. It's stated as a benediction or a blessing towards God. It's written by the Apostle Paul, and it says something about God that's just really important for us to hold on to. Now, to him who's able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that's at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. And I just love the first little phrase about God, him who is able to do immeasurably more than what we ask or what we could imagine. Which means for those of us who are engaged in relationship with God, we're gonna experience surprise in our lives. And because they're surprises from God, they're good surprises for us. And so for these next several weeks, we're gonna be exploring some of the ways that God surprises us. And I think this is gonna be a really encouraging series for you. So I'm really thankful and glad that you're here for it. So one of my favorite movies is a movie called Secondhand Lions. It's set in rural Texas, 1962, and it's about these two old guys. They're in their 70s, and they're crotchety old guys, and they're raising their 12, 13-year-old nephew. And so one of the scenes in the movie, the three guys are out tending their household garden. And they have planted in their garden, they have planted a row of corn, and they've planted a row of tomatoes, and they've planted a row of squash, and they even planted a row of bok choy. And they're tending this garden. The plants have started to sprout a little bit, and much to their surprise and aggravation, all the plants look the same. And so they're hoeing the garden, and there's this moment of humorous conflict, and they discover that it's all corn. It's all corn. And the guy who actually bought the seed just makes the comment. He says, yeah, that seed salesman sure saw us coming, didn't he? And I'm so glad, because it's one of my favorite movies, so I'm really glad about it. I'm glad it doesn't take like this fantasy turn where it doesn't matter what kind of seed you plant, you get corn, because that's too far out there for me in this kind of a movie, because the truth is it does matter what kind of seed you plant, right? This is just a law of nature. If you plant a corn seed, you get corn. If you plant tomato seeds, you get tomato. And if you plant bok choy seed, you get bok choy in your garden. I mean, this is a law of nature. This is such an established law of nature that Jesus told us we can tell what kind of people we're dealing with, because by your fruit, you will know them. By their fruit, you will know them. We can know what kind of people we're engaged with by the way their lives, by the fruit that gets produced in their lives. And so this established rule of nature, the kind of seed that gets planted, whether it is a physical seed in the ground or it is a metaphorical seed in our life, the kind of seed that gets planted, that's the kind of fruit you're gonna bear. Now, we need a good surprise from God, because most of us have had seeds of evil planted in our lives. And maybe it's something that somebody did to you on purpose or on accident. Maybe it's something that just happened in the normal course of events. It could even be something that you did to yourself. We've all had seeds of evil planted in our lives, and if things just go the way things go, then those seeds of evil are going to bear fruit in our lives. If we've had evil seeds planted in our lives, and that's just the way it's gonna be, unless God steps in and does something good for us. And so what I'd like to talk with you about today is this God who is able to do above and beyond anything that we can ask for or we can imagine, how he could step into your life and take those seeds of evil that have been planted and cause them to produce good fruit. So this is an amazing thing. And to do this, we're gonna look at the story of a guy in the Bible named Joseph. We're gonna do an overview of his life. So we're gonna go fast. If you're familiar with this story, you're gonna say, wow, that was really fast. And if you're not familiar with this story, you're gonna say, Wow, he left a lot of holes. There's a lot of questions unanswered. So the Bible covers this in Genesis 37 through Genesis 50. We're going to cover it in about the next 15 to 18 minutes, all right? So we're going to take about a minute a chapter to talk through an overview of this guy named Joseph and see the seeds for evil that were planted in his life, and we'll get to see how God turned them into good. And so we'll wrap up our time together. I'd like to talk with you about some perspectives that you and I could have that would allow us to keep our lives and our hearts open to God doing this kind of work in our lives. So Genesis chapter 37 is where Joseph's story starts. Genesis is the first book of the Bible, so this is about 2/3 of the way through it. We meet this guy named Joseph, and when we meet him, there's some things that we just find out about him super fast. First, he's 17 years old when we meet him. He's not a kid, because in that day, 17 years old, he had grown-up responsibilities. And in our day, 17-year-old, you could have grown-up responsibilities. Not a kid, but he's still young. He's relatively inexperienced. His current level of maturity, he's making some mistakes in his life. One of the things that happened to him that he couldn't help, he was actually his dad's favorite. While that sounds good, he had 11 other brothers, so 12 boys. To be dad's favorite in a family of 12 boys put him in a bad position with his other brothers. You might know this story, the Joseph and the coat of many colors. He was his dad's favorite to the point that his dad gave him a coat that identified him as the favorite. You talk about dysfunction in the family, that creates a mess there. And on top of that, Joseph was a narc. He was not afraid to tattle on his brothers. The story in the scriptures tells that there was a day that his dad sent him out to check on his brothers. They were shepherds, and Joseph's one of the younger ones, and go check on your older brothers and see the work that they're doing out there as shepherds. And Joseph comes back and gives a bad report. He wasn't on his brothers' teams at all. He was just willing to narc on them. He had two different dreams of his family members bowing down to him. That's an odd dream to begin with. And worse, at his level of maturity, he shared that dream with his family. Can you put yourself in the seat of an older brother for just a moment? And the dude, the coat of many colors, who tattles on us when we're not doing good enough for dad, is now dreaming that someday he's going to be sitting above us and we're going to all be bowed down to him. He was definitely not his brother's favorite, right? So he is dad's favorite, but not the brother's favorite. And so this story begins with Joseph at home, and his brothers are about 50 miles away grazing their sheep because they're shepherds. So dad sends Joseph to go check on them and bring back a report on how things are going in the far pasture. And he's done this before and come back with bad report. So he goes out to check on them. And when his brothers see him coming, they see their chance. And so their first thought was to kill him. They argued it out, and they thought better of that. They decided instead to take him alive and throw him into an empty cistern or empty water well. And as he was in that well, and they were still arguing about what they're going to do with him, a caravan of merchants came by, and the brothers sold Joseph to them as a slave. So these dudes sold their brother into slavery, and then they took his coat of many colors, and they tore it up, and they dipped it in blood, and they took it back to dad and led dad to believe that we found this coat, and was this Joseph's coat? It looks like Joseph's coat. That their brother, they led dad to believe that their brother had been eaten by a wild animal. So meanwhile, Joseph is in the merchant caravan, and the merchant caravan heads down into Egypt, and there Joseph was resold as a slave to a guy named Potiphar. Okay, so Potiphar is the captain of the guard of Pharaoh's guard. So Pharaoh's the king of Egypt. So Joseph is sold into slavery to a very powerful, well-connected person in the nation of Egypt. And so Joseph is a slave in Potiphar's house. Genesis 39, starting in verse 2, Joseph as a slave. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. He lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, so Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. So a huge question we should be asking right now is, why was the Lord with Joseph? right? What is it about Joseph that caused the Lord to be with this 17-year-old kid who was a narc on his brothers and his dad's, like what is it about him that, because if we could just know what it is about Joseph that caused the Lord's favor to rest upon him, like we could just spend the rest of our time talking about that and how we could do that. So here's the answer. What was it about Joseph that caused the Lord's favor to be on him? Nothing. It was nothing about Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph and had his favor on him because of a promise that God had made to Joseph's great, great, great grandfather, Abraham. 3 generations before, God had appeared to Abraham and said, hey, Abraham, I'm gonna be with you, and I'm gonna bless you, and I'm gonna bless your descendants who come after you. I'm gonna prosper you, and those who bless you, I will bless, and those who curse you, I will curse. I'm gonna be with you. God makes this beautiful promise to Abraham and to his family. And so here Joseph is several generations later living in the faithfulness of God. So there's nothing about Joseph that draws God's attention or God's favor. This is a story about the faithfulness of God to his family. And so I'm not saying that like Joseph was not a guy of faith. We're just saying that there's nothing in the story to this point that would indicate, oh, God's favor rests on Joseph because, except for this beautiful promise that God made to his great-great-great-grandfather. The first hint of faith we get in Joseph's life comes when Potiphar, his owner, when Potiphar's wife began to pursue him. And so she would proposition him day after day. She's pursuing him, she's harassing him. And in his rejection of her, he always makes this statement, how could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Right, so that's a faith-based response in his commitment to live in purity. How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And so she got tired of that, probably embarrassed by his rejection. And one day, she told her husband, Potiphar, one of the most powerful men in Egypt, she told her husband that, not that she'd been pursuing Joseph, but that he had attacked her. And when Potiphar hears this, he is rightly angered and has Joseph thrown into prison. And so Joseph, favored son, slave, now prisoner. And while Joseph, so this is Genesis 39, while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. So Joseph starts as the favorite son, and he was sold and became the favorite slave. He was lied about and became the favorite prisoner. And those seeds of evil that his brothers planted in his life are now starting to come up. And God is still with him, and God is still being faithful to him, but there's no way Joseph is loving his life right now. Like this is a terrible situation. To be the favorite slave is, you're still a slave. And to be the favorite prisoner, you're still a prisoner, and unjustly in all of that for him. So Joseph's the head prisoner, and one day 2 new prisoners come in, and they're from Pharaoh's household. Remember, Pharaoh's the king of Egypt, so they're from the king's household, and at some point, each one of these guys has a dream, and they know the dream means something, but they don't know what it means. And so they're talking about, I've had this dream, and I know it means something, and I don't know what it means. I wish we had somebody who could interpret our dream for us. And Joseph says to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dream. So we're 11 years into Joseph's story. We're 11 minutes into this time together, but we're 11 years into Joseph's story. And this is the second time we have some hint of his faithfulness to God. And again, I'm not saying he's been unfaithful. I'm just saying this is a story about God's faithfulness. And so he asked him, he says, interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dreams. So they each tell him their dream. And Joseph interprets them. And Joseph was right about his interpretation. And for one guy, it was bad news. He actually ended up getting executed. The other guy, good news, he got to go right back to Pharaoh's house. And Joseph's one request for the kindness of interpreting their dreams, so they knew what the dream meant. Joseph's one request to the guy who was going back to his position was, when you get there, will you please tell Pharaoh that I was unjustly sold into slavery and I was lied about and imprisoned. When you get to Pharaoh, will you remember me? Will you remember me? And so the guy's returned to his post and he totally forgets about Joseph. Totally forgets about him. For 2 years, Joseph is waiting for him to remember him before he totally forgets about him until Pharaoh has a dream. Actually, Pharaoh had 2 dreams. Pharaoh has 2 dreams, back-to-back dreams, and nobody can figure out what the dreams mean. And so Pharaoh's court is all agitated and on edge because Pharaoh is agitated and on edge because nobody can tell him what the dream means. And then the guy remembers Joseph. And he tells Pharaoh, there was a guy in prison. I had a dream. He told me what it meant, and he was right. And so Pharaoh sends for Joseph. And they give him time to shave and put on clean clothes. And this guy who has been enslaved and in prison for 13 years is now standing before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, I hear you can interpret dreams. Can you interpret my dreams? And Joseph says, this is Genesis 41, I cannot do it. Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. So Pharaoh tells Joseph his dreams. First one, there were 7 really fat, healthy cows along the Nile riverbank. The Nile runs through Egypt there. And there were these 7 really fat, healthy cows. And then 7 skinny, scrawny, nasty-looking cows came along and ate those 7 healthy cows. This is a nightmare. This isn't a dream. This is a nightmare. And then the next dream, there were 7 beautiful, full heads of grain. And then 7 scrawny, nasty-looking heads of grain sprung up next to him and turned on him and ate them up. And so Pharaoh's sitting and wondering, what does this dream mean? So Joseph says to him, God has shown Pharaoh what God's about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered because the famine that follows it will be so severe. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. And Joseph presents this plan. Joseph says, hey, 20% tax on all the grain and all the stuff, the produce of the land, 20% tax for the 7 years of abundance, and then we'll have enough to carry us through the 7 years of famine. And Pharaoh says, great plan. So Pharaoh says, great plan, and says to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there's no one so discerning and wise as you. You should be in charge. And right then, Joseph goes from being the favorite prisoner to number 2 in the land of Egypt. Pharaoh says, the only person who'll be greater than you in this entire nation is me. And so it's this huge reversal. And Egypt was the world power of the day. So arguably, Joseph is the second most powerful person in the entire world in this moment. And now he is not free to leave, right? He's still in Egypt and being held in Egypt. He's not free to leave, but he has had this radical reversal of fortune, and it is, God has just stepped in and helped him. So the 7 years of abundance, the first part of the dream, the fat, healthy cows, the full heads of grain. So in the 7 years of abundance, Joseph, he gets married and he has 2 kids during that 7 years. And they're both boys. And the names he gives to them, I think, are incredibly significant. The oldest, he names Manasseh. And he names his oldest Manasseh because that name means God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. All right, so he is not saying, like, I can't remember, right? He's not talking about, like, I've had a magic wiping of my memory. What he's saying is all the stuff I've been through, it's not going to define me. Right? So I am no longer defined by the seeds of evil that were planted in my life, the stuff that other people did to me, the things that happened for me. I am not defined by that anymore. Manasseh. And then his second son, Ephraim. He named him Ephraim, he says, because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. This sounds like healing to me. Does this sound like healing to you? This sounds like healing to me. It's not denial, right? He's still living in Egypt, and he's still willing to say that I am in the land of my suffering, but he's experiencing good. He's experiencing good, the goodness of God in the midst of the difficult things that were happening in his life. And so there's this moment of healing for Joseph during the 7 years of plenty. And then during the 7 years of famine. Okay, this famine did not just impact Egypt. This famine impacted the entire ancient Near East, which included what is modern day Israel, which is where Joseph was from. It's where his brothers and his dad still live. And Joseph had collected so much grain during those years of plenty, those 7 years of plenty, that they stopped measuring it. They stopped counting it. There was so much. And by year 2 of the famine, the world was coming to Egypt in order to purchase grain, and Joseph was in charge of all of that. And one day, Joseph looks up, and in walks 10 of his 11 brothers. Their family was starving. They were there to buy food. He recognized them, but they did not recognize him. They thought he was an Egyptian, and they were at his mercy for food, and they bowed down before him. You remember the dream? They bowed down before him, and they asked him to sell them grain. So Joseph this time keeps his identity from them a secret. He questioned them. He found out his dad was still alive. He found out his little brother was still alive. He sold them the grain, and he commanded them to go home and to come back with their younger brother who wasn't there on this trip. And so they were slow about it. The brothers were slow about it, but they did it. And when they came back to Egypt on the second trip, all 11 brothers bowed before Joseph again, and that's when he told them who he was. So they're shocked at first. And then as reality settled in, they were afraid because they threw him in a pit and sold him into slavery and told their dad he died. And for the last, what are we now, 17, 24, 25 years, they've been living out the lie. He's been living the seeds of evil. They're terrified. And so Joseph says to them, and now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. And then he invited them to come with their families to live in the nation of Egypt under his protection and under his care, to go home, get dad, get the rest of your family, come back here and I will take care of you, which is what they did. And they lived in Egypt under Joseph's care for another 17 years before their dad died. And then when their dad died, they thought that they were in trouble. They were worried that now Joseph is going to get his revenge on us. And so they came to the palace and again bowed before him, and for the first time asked him for forgiveness, and they begged him for their lives. And Joseph responds to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So Joseph is looking back on the last 30-something years at this point. For 30-something years, he's been in the land of his suffering, looking back on the last 30-something years of his life, and says to his brothers, you planted on purpose, you planted seeds of evil in my life, but God has caused those evil seeds to bear good fruit. What you intended for harm, God actually intended for good. And that's what God does. That's what God does. He brings incredible reversals into our lives. He brings good out of evil for us. And it does not matter for any of us how things have started or how things are going right now in the land of your suffering. What you can know is God does above and beyond what people like us are able to ask or imagine. So can I share with you 3 perspectives real quick to hold on to when life isn't going the way you want it, when your life isn't turning out the way you had hoped, when you're living in the land of your suffering. I think these are 3 perspectives that help us count on the faithfulness of God. And the first one is you can always count on the faithfulness of God. He is faithful. What blows my mind about this Joseph story is God is fulfilling a promise that he made hundreds of years before. Great-grandfather. He keeps his promises. He's always consistent with who he's gonna be. He doesn't lose track of you. He doesn't change his mind. He doesn't unmake his promises. Like he hangs on, he hangs in. You can always count on the faithfulness of God. And you can know that God is always doing immeasurably more than I can ask or imagine. This isn't just sometimes. That every once in a while he cranks it up, goes from a C to a B or becomes an A player in our lives. Like God is always doing more than you can ask or imagine. He does that miraculously. Sometimes he just steps into our lives and supersedes the laws of nature and does something that we all scratch our head about and say, there is no other explanation than someone who is bigger and more powerful, smarter, more creative than us has stepped in and done something for us, right? Sometimes he steps in miraculously. The resurrection of Jesus, he stepped in miraculously, suspends the laws of nature, and we get to live in the miraculous work of God. And sometimes he does it providentially. The doctrine of providence just means that God works in and through the normal course of things. And what we got to know in this is God's always in the driver's seat. He's always in the driver's seat. Sometimes you wonder if he's even in the car by the way things are going in your life, right? But God is always in the driver's seat. He's always doing more, immeasurably more than we could ask or imagine. He's at work in the ordinary course of things for our good. For our good. And so he works providentially and he works eternally. God's always playing the long game. You and I are not, we are short-sighted by nature. it's the way we are. We see now and we see a little bit in front of us and we don't think a whole lot longer than that. And God is always at work doing more that we can imagine or ask for our eternal good and for his eternal glory. So we know that God is always at work. He's always at work, doing more than you could ask or imagine. In the land of your suffering, you can always count on the faithfulness of God. God is always doing more than you could ask or imagine of him. He's always doing it. And then this last, just kind of this New Testament statement. If you've been around church very long, you've heard this verse. This is one to hang on to. In all things, God works for the good of those who love him. In all things. And everything that's going on in your life, everything that's going on in my life, the stuff that we cannot figure out, the stuff that seems like there's no way this is going to be good. When somebody is sowing seeds of evil in your life, he is working that for good, the lives of those who love him. Can I tell you, he loves you. God loves you. He has demonstrated his love for you through Jesus' death on the cross. Like there's no greater love than somebody being willing to lay down their life for somebody else. And what God has done for you is he has sacrificed his son. What Jesus has done for you is he has laid down his life for you. God has proven his love for you. The real question for us is, do you love him? Right? Do you love him? And not do you have the warm fuzzies when you think about God, but like, do you trust him? Right? Have you entrusted yourself to him? Have you looked to him and said, for leadership, for direction, do you trust him? Do you trust him? That's because for those who trust him, for those who love him, what he's doing is he's working all things together for good. And his work and the good that he brings about in our lives is more, abundantly more, immeasurably more than people like us could ask him to do or could imagine that he would do for us. But because of his love for you, because of who he is, the promises he's made in our lives, we get to experience immeasurably more. So can I pray for us? Can I wrap up my time with you just by praying for us? Would you guys bow your head and close your eyes with me? And maybe this is a moment where you need to pray too, to express your love for God, your willingness to trust him in the land of your suffering, to receive the healing that he would give to you. So Lord, great is your faithfulness. Your steadfast love towards us never fails. Great is your faithfulness. And so we're here as people who one way or another, there are seeds of evil that have been sown into our lives. And apart from your intervention, that's going to bear evil fruit. So you've said, for those of us who love you, you'll work that for good. Sometimes it's hard to see how you're going to do that. Sometimes we wonder if you really are. But today, in this moment, we're trusting you. And we're saying, great is your faithfulness. So thank you for your work that we can see, for the stuff that you're doing we can't see, for your love which you have lavished on us in Jesus, for the future that we're experiencing because of who you are. So today we say that you are our God and we're your people, and we trust you for immeasurably more than we could ask or imagine. And we know that all of this comes to us through Jesus. We're grateful. So Jesus, we're praying these things in your name. Amen.